In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. There are moments in history when the world doesn't need a storm to tremble. When a single decision made thousands of miles away becomes a wave that shakes nations. And in such moments, the believer must ask, not just what is happening, but why. Today, we are witnessing one of those moments. A narrow stretch of water, silent, steady, almost invisible to the average soul, has been shut. The Strait of Hormuz, a passage through which the world's lifeblood flows, has come to a halt. Oil stops, ships freeze, markets fall, and panic spreads like wildfire. But behind all of this, there is something greater unfolding, a divine message written into the events of the world. This is not just a political story. This is a spiritual wake-up call. What does it mean when the most powerful nations tremble at the silence of a closed gate? What does it reveal about the illusions we've built around wealth, control, and security? And more importantly, what is Allah telling us through this global moment? Stay with me until the end. Because this is not just about Iran, it's not just about oil. It's about you, it's about your faith, your future, and your place in a world that is being reshaped not just by power, but by divine permission. Let's journey together through this moment of global crisis and uncover the signs, the wisdom, and the awakening hidden within it. Bismillah. Let us begin. The Strait of Hormuz, though a narrow channel of water between Iran and Oman, holds a weight far beyond its size, a divine paradox that humbles even the most powerful of nations. It is through this strait that nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows. Every day, over 20 million barrels of oil pass through its waters, sustaining homes, factories, vehicles, and lives across the earth. Yet, for all its might, it is no wider than a man can walk in a few hours. The Almighty, in His infinite wisdom, made it so that something so small could carry such immense consequence. In this design, believers can see the hand of providence, how the smallest gate can determine the fate of nations. Oil may seem worldly, but its supply fuels hospitals that heal the sick, bakeries that feed the hungry, and the energy that lights up mosques and schools. When the Strait of Hormuz is shut, the lights go dim across the globe, not only in a literal sense, but in the hearts of people whose lives depend on stability. One could say that God uses these events to remind humanity of its fragility. For all the steel and wealth and modern systems man has built, he is still tethered to a narrow path of water, unable to control the tides of conflict and consequence. Iran's position over this waterway is not just geopolitical, it is deeply spiritual. The land it guards is soaked in centuries of faith, struggle, and divine testing. And when such a nation, shaped by scripture and sanctity, closes the gate, the world trembles. Not because of weapons, but because the lifeblood of the earth, the oil, has been paused. And in that pause lies a moment of truth. Do we trust in God alone, or in the illusion of global systems? Do we place our faith in the Creator or in the container ships that pass silently through the night? The prophet, peace be upon him, taught us that even the flap of a butterfly's wings is under divine command. Then what of the closing of a strait that feeds billions? This is not random, nor merely political. It is a sign that arrogance will always bow to design, that power can never replace purpose, and that human beings, no matter how advanced, remain dependent on the balance set forth by the Almighty. Religious communities are not called to fear these events, but to reflect, to realize that reliance on the material alone is fleeting, that unity, patience, and prayer have more power than missiles and sanctions, that perhaps this global alarm is a divine call to realign our priorities, to remember who truly holds the keys to sustenance and peace. Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a political or military tactic. It is, for the believer, a manifestation of divine balance in global affairs. The Islamic Republic of Iran, situated at the northern edge of this crucial maritime corridor, has long held a unique position in the geopolitical chessboard of the Middle East. While much of the world views the strait as a narrow waterway vital for oil transit, those with eyes of faith recognize something deeper. Iran's control of this strait is a trust, a test, and a tool through which global powers are reminded forcefully that no empire, no matter how vast, can escape the will of the Almighty. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran has stood apart from the secular order that dominates international relations. It has challenged Western hegemony, endured decades of sanctions, and survived targeted economic warfare with resilience. But central to Iran's enduring relevance is not merely its military strength or natural resources. It is its control over a divine choke point. When Iran threatens or enacts a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't just flex power, it reminds the world of a higher order. The same West that often dismisses the divine in policy is brought to its knees by the ripple effects of a few Iranian naval maneuvers. Oil prices soar, economies wobble, leaders panic. And all this is done not through war, but through the strategic closing of a channel no wider than the horizon. To the religious mind, this is not coincidental. This is a clear sign that Allah can place immense power in the hands of a nation the world deems isolated or embattled. When sanctions are placed on Iran, it can respond not with desperation, but by tightening its grip on the one artery that keeps the global economy alive. The oil that flows from the Gulf states must pass through Iran's reach. And when Iran chooses, it can halt the march of commerce, not through chaos, but through calculation. This is not recklessness. It is restraint forged through divine patience. Furthermore, this leverage is rooted in divine wisdom. Iran's guardianship of the strait is a constant reminder that sustenance is not in the hands of man. Nations can build their economies on oil, but if Allah wills, a single strait can become a gate of scarcity. It is also a reminder to Muslims across the world that even amidst adversity, faith-alike leadership that refuses to bow to tyranny can still hold the reins of influence. Iran's stance, whether one agrees politically or not, is a living testament that tawakkul, reliance on God, can coexist with strategic might. So when the world fears Iran's hand over Hormuz, it is not merely fearing a government. It is fearing a disruption to the false illusion of self-sufficiency. The strait becomes a pulpit, and its closure a sermon. It declares to all who rely solely on worldly systems, true control rests with the one who parts seas and commands tides. When the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the impact is not confined to borders, currencies, or headlines. It ripples across the entire fabric of human existence, touching lives from the oil fields of the Gulf to the marketplaces of Asia, from the industrial zones of Europe to the gas stations of America. In this chain of worldly dependence, a single act rooted in a strategic decision shakes the illusion of man's control. For the believer, such a moment is not simply about economic fallout. It is a mirror reflecting how interconnected and fragile the modern world truly is. How easily Allah can disturb the rhythm of nations through a single corridor of water. Within hours of the strait being shut, oil prices surge uncontrollably. Markets, built on forecasts and greed, stumble like blind men in a storm. Currencies weaken. Inflation strikes. Ordinary people begin to feel the tremors. Fuel becomes more expensive. Food prices begin to rise. Transport slows down, and industries begin to panic. All of this unfolds not because of an earthquake or a natural disaster, but because Allah allowed one nation to pause the passage of ships through a narrow waterway. In that single moment, the true dependency of the modern world is exposed, not upon technology, nor upon wealth, but upon access. Access that can be denied by the will of one through the permission of the Almighty. This is where the believer must look past the physical into the spiritual. This panic is not chaos. It is divine calibration. It teaches that man's arrogance in building towering systems of trade and commerce has always stood on the permission of Allah. The fuel that runs our cars, the gas that heats our homes, the oil that drives factories, all of it flows through a fragile path that can be sealed in an instant. And yet man continues to believe in his invincibility. The economic giants of the world tremble at the thought of a few days of closure, yet they rarely tremble before the one who holds all things in his hand. The believer sees that this is not merely Iran asserting political dominance. This is a wake-up call from the heavens, a disruption sent not to destroy, but to remind. Just as Pharaoh's power was undone by water, so too today, water remains a means by which Allah humbles the arrogant. The sea that once split for Musa can now be used to split the certainty of global empires who thought themselves untouchable. In this closure, the world sees that sovereignty is not in armies or alliances, it is in permission. If Allah permits, oil flows. If He withholds, entire civilizations reel. This is a moment for reflection, not only on the cost of oil, but on the cost of forgetting the source. The strait may be shut by political hands, but the decree comes from above. The panic that erupts across nations is a sign that the world is still governed not by chance, but by command. A sign that even in modernity, the power of one small gate under divine watch can still humble the mighty and remind the heedless. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz does not simply provoke a reaction of fear or economic concern. It triggers a spiritual alarm for those who reflect. In the immediate aftermath of such a move, the world witnesses not only the scrambling of ships and the roar of engines, but the desperation of global powers to reassert their control. Military alliances are awakened. Fleets from the United States, Britain, and their allies begin to position themselves in the Gulf. Emergency meetings are held in the chambers of the United Nations. Leaders speak of freedom of navigation, of economic stability, of security, but what they are truly grappling with is the collapse of an illusion. The illusion that they can prevent what Allah allows. From a believer's perspective, this unfolding chaos is not mere geopolitics, it is divine theater. It shows how the most powerful militaries in the world, with their billion-dollar vassals and cutting-edge weapons, are ultimately paralyzed by a decision made thousands of miles away, by a nation accused of isolation yet anchored in sovereignty. Iran's ability to disrupt the movement of ships and commodities forces even the most arrogant nations to the table of diplomacy. They come not out of compassion, but out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of global backlash, fear of the collapse of markets they cannot protect with missiles alone. The Quran teaches us that nations rise and fall by the command of Allah. The closure of the strait becomes a moment when that truth plays out before our eyes. These modern-day pharaohs who possess mighty armies and command the skies and seas are brought low, not by war, but by the tightening grip of a nation they despise. And this nation, while not free from flaws, asserts its decisions with the knowledge that it stands in a position ordained by divine design. This confrontation of powers, this gathering of fleets, and this rising tension serve as a reminder to the Ummah that might without righteousness is hollow. Military presence means nothing if divine permission is absent. As warships begin to surround the Gulf and drones hover overhead and statements are issued from world capitals, we are reminded of the verse, and they plan, but Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. The display of military might may intimidate the creation, but it cannot alter the decree of the Creator. Every movement in those waters, every meeting behind closed doors, every trembling oil executive or financial analyst, they're all reacting to a command already written. It is not chaos unfolding, but destiny being revealed. This is not a call for war. It is a call for awareness. To understand that behind every diplomatic negotiation, behind every ship sent into those tense waters, is the hand of Allah, testing nations, humbling leaders, and reminding the believers that justice, balance, and peace will never be achieved through weapons alone. It will come when nations submit not just to treaties, but to truth. When they recognize that real security flows not from the barrel of a gun, but from the obedience to the one who controls the winds, the seas, and the hearts of men. When Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, the resulting global panic is not simply economic instability. It is a profound revelation of how fragile human systems are when disconnected from divine guidance. Nations that pride themselves on modernity, self-sufficiency, and technological advancement suddenly find themselves crippled by the loss of a single supply route. Countries that depend on the flow of oil, Japan, India, South Korea, and much of Europe, experience not just logistical disruption, but moral and political confusion. Leaders are forced into emergency meetings, markets plummet, and societies react with fear, protests, and political unrest. But what the world calls disruption, the believer must recognize as a sign. A divine message written not on stone tablets, but in the shifting of trade winds and the halting of old tankers. Allah has created a world of means, but he is not bound by them. He has allowed certain nations to rise in wealth, power, and industry, but he has also placed tests in their path to remind them that they do not sustain themselves. When a single act, such as Iran closing a narrow waterway, can send the entire global economy into shock, it is proof that the foundations of this worldly order are not built on rock, but on sand. The same governments that speak with pride about progress and control are reduced to begging for stability, not by facing an army, but by witnessing a delay in shipments. For the believer, this event is not merely geopolitical, it is a divine unveiling. It shows us that Allah can use the smallest of mechanisms to humble the greatest of powers. The Strait of Hormuz is not vast. It is not fortified by skyscrapers or defended by massive walls. And yet, it holds in its narrowness the ability to shake empires. This is not an accident. It is a divine balance set in motion by the one who gives and withholds as he will. The panic that erupts in nations far from the Gulf is also a reflection of what happens when societies place their trust in materialism, in financial institutions, and in unbridled consumption. When the flow of oil stops, the flow of comfort stops. And in that discomfort, people begin to question, fear, and blame. But they do not look upward. They do not reflect on the Creator who allowed it to happen. The believer, however, sees through this. He understands that political unrest, economic collapse, and public fear are all signs that a society built on arrogance cannot stand when the mercy of Allah is withheld. What else can... Iran's action may trigger panic, but the panic is not the enemy. It is the consequence of a world disconnected from the remembrance of Allah. It is the shaking of a global order built without divine foundation. For Muslims witnessing this event, the lesson is clear. Do not place your trust in the systems of man. Place it in the one who can cause the earth to yield or withhold, who can raise nations or bring them low through a single gate of water. In the panic of others, find your clarity. In their fear, renew your faith. In witnessing the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the chaos that follows, we are not merely observing a geopolitical conflict. We are witnessing a divine sign, a sign that even in the modern world of satellites and stock markets, it is Allah who governs the rise and fall of nations. It is He who opens the sea for some and closes it for others. The panic that erupts, the military that gathers, the markets that collapse, and the leaders who tremble, all are reminders that man does not control his destiny without the permission of his Creator. This moment is not one of despair, but one of awakening. It calls upon the believing heart to reflect, to realign, and to remember that all strength, all sustenance, all security flows only from Allah. While the world chases oil, power, and influence, the believer chases understanding, humility, and obedience. The Strait of Hormuz may be narrow, but the lessons it delivers are vast. It teaches us that no matter how advanced humanity becomes, it will always be subject to the decree of the one who commands the heavens and the earth. Let us not fear the shaking of the world, but fear becoming blind to its meanings. Let us not be swept away by the noise of politics, but grounded in the silence of reflection. Let us prepare not only our nations, but our souls. For every closure in this world is an opening for faith for those who choose to see. Thank you, and may Allah bless you all with insight, patience, and strength in these times of trial. May your hearts remain firm, your vision clear, and your trust unshaken in the will of the Almighty. Good luck, and may peace be upon you.